In the first video, we looked at readings 1, 2, 3, and 5 and their original sources for the statistics that they present. In this video, we're going to look at each of the 7 statistics in reading 4. Since there are so many statistics that are central to this article, I figured we should do a separate video for this. So we'll start at the top with statistic number 1, that police are more likely to shoot white people than black people. So they cite 2 sources, the author cites 2 sources for this statistic. So we'll look at the first one, which is supposedly a Harvard study. So we'll open that, and it takes us to an article on the same site, and then that article links to the actual study, and there's a PDF right here front and center. It's published and funded by the National Bureau of Economic Research, so calling it a Harvard study is a little misleading. The professor that wrote it does work at Harvard, but that's not who supported this research. At any rate, this is a pretty dense article. I'm not going to read all the background, or I'm not going to read the article to you at all. I'm just looking for some of the highlights. What is the point of this? Our article, or our reading for the course claims that this article shows that blacks are 20% less likely to be shot at by police than whites. So that is the claim that is being made, and that's what we're trying to verify using this source. And actually, in part 2, the data, it tells you where this data is coming from. So the first, I think there are 4 sources. The first source is New York City's Stop and Frisk program. So that's specific to New York City. The second source is the Police Public Contact Survey, which if we look at that, it is a nationally representative sample collected every 3 years by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So there's that. But that's more about interactions between civilians and police. It's not about officer-involved shootings, and neither is the Stop and Frisk program. The other 2 data sets, officer-involved shootings in 10 locations across the United States. So that possibly could give us some data there. And then interactions between civilians and police in Houston, Texas. So these 2 data sets seem to be the most relevant to the claim that we're actually looking at. So the officer-involved shootings information comes from Boston, Camden, New York City, Philadelphia, Austin, Dallas, Houston, LA, 6 counties in Florida, and Tacoma. So whether or not you believe that's representative of the entire United States, or if it's really just specific to these areas, that's something that's debatable. But it seems that we should be able to get some information there. And then the Houston PD information also has some officer-involved shooting data specific to Houston. Looking for that specific statistic, we get to officer-involved shootings. So here is the very specific statistical model they're using to make these predictions, and it is only using data from Houston. So they did not mention that in the article, that this only applies to Houston. But using this data, they're estimating racial differences in officer-involved shootings. And the data for this information is in Table 4, so we'll scroll down to Table 4 in just a moment. Here's their big claim, though. In Table 4, the results in Table 4 tell us that blacks are 23.5% less likely to be shot by police relative to whites. So that is precisely the sentence where this author is getting this information. And the study is saying that this is supported by the data and results in Table 4. So let's just scroll past the rest and get to Table 4. So this table reports odds ratios from logistic regressions. Columns 1 through 3, so this first chunk here, are all officer-involved shootings in Houston from 2000 to 2015, plus a random sample of arrests for some specific offenses. Columns 4 and 5 include all officer-involved shootings, plus a sample where tasers were used, and then 6 and 7 is all of that. So all officer-involved shootings with those other sample of other specific crimes included and the taser uses included. So that's what the columns represent. And then the rows are different controls. So for example, when you go from A to B, A is just, here we go. First row is just based on race. The second row adds gender and age. The third row adds demographics of the police officers present at the scene and so on. So there's different controls that are added as you go down the rows. But if we look, and it states that these are odd ratios from logistic regressions conditioned on an interaction. So they're assuming that there's an interaction between a civilian and a police officer, and they're looking at the odds ratios of whether or not there is a shooting. Without reading the full paper, it's hard to understand what these numbers actually mean. But assuming that we can read the paper, understand the context of the numbers, and that there's no errors in reporting, presumably we can say that their conclusions are probably correct, unless there's an error in the paper. So these conclusions are probably correct. So this is a correct statement based on this study, which only uses data from Houston. So it's a little bit misleading to say that it's nationally, but this is just for the Houston PD. There's a second study that is cited for the same statistic that actually says that whites are 1.7 times more likely than blacks to die at the hands of police, and we could try and retrace that. And here we go. Just clicking through the citations. So it took us first to another article on the same site, now it's a news article on a different site. And this site does not cite, I don't see any links to the actual study. If we try and skim it and read a little bit closer, FBI data is notoriously incomplete, so this professor used figures from the website Killed by Police. So presumably we could go to that website and recreate, hopefully, the statistics that are cited here. Before we go and look at this website source, I just want to look through this source, which was cited by our reading that was assigned for the course. And there's a lot of information here. The first being that the professor reports on the percentage for each race over this specific period, 2013 to 2015, and also notes that about 25% did not include a race at all. So really, if you think about it, this is of the people whose race was reported. If you look at the total, a quarter of them wouldn't even have a race reported. And then the first thing that the researcher does is adjust for racial population or racial breakdown of the U.S. population, and says that black men are 3.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white men. And then the second adjustment that he does adjusts for homicide rates among races. And that's the statistic that was quoted in the article we read for class, that whites are 1.7 times more likely than blacks to die at the hands of police. So that's the statistic that we read in the original article. And this is where it's coming from, is that first you eliminate a quarter of the data, which does not include race at all. Then you break that down by race. Then you make adjustments first based on breakdown of the population, then adjusted for homicide rates among the races. And there's some more nuance presented for those numbers here than there were in the article that we read. The researcher points out a couple different factors that could explain that, but the article that we read is using it to support an entirely different point about systemic racism in policing. So whether or not this result extends to that is debatable, but it appears that it is accurately reporting on the results that this researcher found. So here is that website. This is just the 2018 page, which would not have been included in this study because this article was published in 2016. So it would have had the 2016, 2015. It would have looked at the earlier data. But looking at 2018, this site shows date, state, gender, and race, although race is missing in a lot of these. Name and age, which I don't know why those aren't separated. It'd be harder to do data analysis if the age is separate, or if the age is included here. And then this is the method of death. So if you scroll the whole way down, it shows G stands for gun, T stands for taser, R is for restraint or physical force, chemical, vehicle, and other. So a lot of G's in there, which is not that surprising to me. And then if they have a link on their own website, their own Facebook page, I guess, that goes in this column, and then a news article would be linked here to tell you more about the story. So this site seems to be collecting good data. Not sure how complete it is, how often it's updated. It looks to be pretty up to date for now. I mean, today is it's the end of July when I'm recording this, 2018, and this is going through the end of June 2018. So that's pretty recently updated, and it appears to be pretty comprehensive. It looks like the data from, more than a month back, so May and before, or even early June, is more comprehensive than some of the later June data. There's a lot more missing data late than early. So, and it takes contributions. So these are, this is a sort of a crowdsourced data set that was used for that analysis. So we could pull all of this data. It's not in a very user-friendly format for data analysis, but there's a lot of race data missing. But we could try to do our own analysis. Maybe if we go back to 2015, there's still some race data missing, but it's a lot more complete than 2018 is right now. So there's our original data source for statistic number 1. So let's speed through the rest of these. We spent a lot of time on statistic number 1. Statistic number 2, the police are less likely to shoot at unarmed black suspects than unarmed white suspects. This is according to a study at Washington State University, which is simulated scenarios, not from real data of actual officer-involved shootings, but from a simulation. But let's take a look and see if we can find the original source for this. So this links to the Washington Post, and the Washington Post has the actual research article embedded at the bottom of the article. So again, this is a pretty dense research article. I'm not going to read it to you, but they talk about their methods and design of this experiment, which was a simulation. So they had a video simulation where officers had to make a call, and so they report on the average reaction time for force, which was a little higher. They took a little longer to decide in the simulation with black suspects than with white suspects. And if they look at the scenarios in which there was no use of force required, there were 387 scenarios with a white suspect and 274 scenarios where no use of force was required for a black suspect. And they actually fired shots in 54 with the white suspect and 2 with the black suspect. So those are the statistics that they're drawing on from that. Again, debatable how much you can draw from a simulation rather than actual real-life scenarios, but the statistics appear to be sound here. Again, you'd want to read the whole thing in detail, make sure that what is reported is exactly what is shown here, but it looks to at least be based on an actual study that was performed. So that's our source for number 2. For number 3, we appear to be using FBI data. So we already saw the FBI database in the first video, and so that's where this data is supposedly coming from for number 3. For statistics 4, 5, and 6 in this article, they all are actually referencing this same book by Heather McDonald. So what you would have to do to verify these statistics in 4, 5, and 6 is buy her book and then look at what sources she cites within the book for each of these. So it would probably be pretty hard to find if you're looking through a whole book for these very specific claims, but that's what we would have to do to be able to verify these. And then finally we get to statistic number 7. By a margin of 50% to 46%, black voters support New York City's broken windows policing, according to a Quinnipiac poll. So, assuming that this links to a real Quinnipiac poll, this should be an accurate statistic. So we click on the link, and it just takes us to New York City related things. So this article is from July 2016. So if we go to the source, we would want to scroll down to things that are before July 2016 and try and find the right poll. Just saw broken windows. Here we go. Broken windows policing. So 57 to 38% overall, 50% to 46% among black voters. So the overall was just for voters in New York City, not for every New Yorker. So this is exactly where they're getting this from. And so the poll results are here, appears to be legitimate. This is a well-respected polling agency. Not sure that this is directly relevant to the overall claim at the beginning of the article, which is that there is no such thing as systemic racism. I don't know how this is related, but regardless, this appears to be an accurate claim. So, in this particular article, there are 7 statistics that are quoted. In the first one, we found one that appears to be accurate, but with a caveat that they didn't report it was only in Houston. The second one may be accurate. We didn't actually go through the killed by police data, but we will do something similar to that in our next video. Claim number 2, again, appears to be accurate with the caveat that it's a simulated scenario. It's not based on actual officer-involved shootings. The third claim is supposedly based on FBI data, so we would have to actually go back and process the FBI data to determine that. And then 4, 5, and 6 we couldn't determine because we don't have access to the sources from this specific book. And 7 appears to be accurate. So, so far so good. Pretty solid sources on the ones that we could find, although the reporting did leave out some important details. In the next video, we're going to look at a similar data source for this particular claim, as well as the claim that is made by Tomi Lahren in the video that you watched for this module. And we'll actually dig into the data, not just find the data, but actually look at it.